Columbia Records, New York, September 1982. The conference room held 12 radio program directors from major markets across America, 3 label executives, and Marvin Gaye. The meeting had been called to discuss airplay strategy for Marvin's comeback single. What should have been a routine promotional session was about to become something else entirely. The song in question was called Sexual Healing, and nobody in that room had heard anything quite like it before. They had played it once at the beginning of the meeting. 4 minutes and 51 seconds of drum machine beats, synthesizer pulses, and Marvin's voice layered over itself in ways that felt almost hypnotic. When it ended, there had been a moment of silence. Not the good kind, the kind that preceded bad news. Marvin sat quietly at the end of the table, wearing dark sunglasses despite the fluorescent lighting. He looked exhausted. The past 2 years in Belgium had aged him. The exile, the cocaine, the paranoia, all of it showed in the lines around his mouth and the way his hands wouldn't stay still. But his posture was calm. He had learned over 2 decades in the music industry how to sit through meetings where men in suits decided his fate. The program director from WBLS New York spoke first. His name was Frankie Crocker, and he was known throughout the industry as a kingmaker. If Frankie played your record, other stations followed. If he didn't, you struggled. Mr. Gaye, Frankie began, his tone respectful but firm, we've listened to the track multiple times. The production is excellent. Your vocal performance is, well, it's you. But we have a problem with the content. Marvin didn't respond. He just tilted his head slightly, the gesture of someone who had heard this kind of preamble before. The title, another director chimed in, from WGC Chicago. Sexual Healing. It's too explicit. We can't play a song with that title in afternoon drive time. Parents will call. Advertisers will complain. A third voice, this one from Power 106 in Los Angeles. It's not just the title, the lyrics. Get up, get up, get up. Let's make love tonight. That's not radio friendly. That's bedroom music. The label executives shifted uncomfortably. They had anticipated resistance, but not this united front. One of them, a senior VP of promotion, tried to mediate. Gentlemen, perhaps we're overthinking this. The song is about healing. It's metaphorical. Frankie Crocker cut him off. With all due respect, there's nothing metaphorical about sexual healing. It's right there in the title. We've had complaints about Donna Summer, about Prince. Our listeners are ready for some boundaries. This crosses them. Marvin finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but everyone in the room went silent to hear it. What would you like me to do? The question hung in the air. The program directors exchanged glances. They hadn't expected capitulation this quickly. Change the title, the WGCI director suggested. Call it Spiritual Healing or just Healing. Keep the music, adjust the lyrics where needed. Make it playable. Or, Frankie added, we can test it in smaller markets first. See if there's backlash. Maybe release it as an album cut rather than a single. Marvin removed his sunglasses. The fluorescent light reflected in his tired eyes. He looked at each man around the table, taking his time, studying their faces. Gentlemen, he said, his voice still quiet, but somehow filling the entire room. Sex has healed more broken people than any sermon I've ever heard. More than any therapy session. More than any drug they prescribed me. The room went completely still. I spent 2 years in Europe trying to remember what it felt like to be human, to feel something other than fear. And what brought me back wasn't politics or protest songs. It was the idea that physical intimacy, real connection with another person, could be medicine. That's not explicit. That's truth. One of the label executives tried to interrupt. Marvin, nobody's questioning the sentiment, but... Marvin kept talking, his voice never rising above conversational volume. I'm not changing the title. I'm not softening the lyrics. If you can't play it, don't play it. But I'm not compromising on this. He stood up, put his sunglasses back on, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You know what's explicit? The violence you play every hour? The songs about killing and gangs. But a song about 2 people finding comfort in each other? That's too much. The door closed behind him with a soft click. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. His hands were shaking slightly. Not from anger, from fear. He had just walked away from guaranteed airplay, from radio support that could make or break a comeback. And he was broke. The IRS wanted millions. His ex-wives wanted their settlements. He needed this record to work. In the elevator alone, Marvin took off his sunglasses and looked at his reflection in the polished metal doors. The man looking back was 43 years old, but looked older. 2 years of exile and cocaine had carved deep lines around his eyes. He wondered, not for the first time, if he had just made a terrible mistake. The elevator reached the lobby. Marvin put his sunglasses back on and walked out into the New York afternoon. He would fly back to Los Angeles that night, back to the small apartment he was renting because he couldn't afford anything better, and he would wait to see if his stubbornness had destroyed his last chance. Back in the conference room, the meeting continued for another hour, but without Marvin there, it felt hollow. The program directors were frustrated. The label executives were panicking. They had invested heavily in Marvin's comeback. Without radio support, the single would die. Over the next 2 weeks, Columbia tried everything. They offered Marvin more money to record an alternate version. They brought in songwriters to pitch safer material. They even suggested releasing a different track as the lead single and saving Sexual Healing for later. Marvin's answer was always the same. No. The label finally made a decision. They would release Sexual Healing as Marvin wanted it, but with minimal promotion. Let it sink or swim on its own merits. If it failed, they would move on to Plan B. The single dropped on September 30th, 1982. The first week, reception was exactly what the radio directors had predicted. Major stations in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles refused to playlist it. Morning show hosts made jokes about the title. Some stations relegated it to late-night programming only, after 10 p.m. when adult content was permitted. WBLS played it once at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, then pulled it after 3 phone complaints. Trade magazines noticed the resistance. Billboard ran a small item: Gaye's Healing faces radio freeze. But something unexpected was happening at record stores. People were asking for it. Not just asking, demanding. Sales clerks reported customers coming in specifically for that Marvin Gaye song about sex. The album it was on, Midnight Love, started moving units faster than any Marvin Gaye release in 5 years. A record store manager in Detroit told Billboard, "We've sold 300 copies in 4 days. I've never seen demand like this without radio support." Word of mouth was doing what radio had refused to do. The song was spreading through communities like a secret being passed from person to person. By week 2, smaller stations that had been playing it were seeing their request lines light up. Listeners wanted to hear it again. And again. The song had a hypnotic quality, that drum machine groove, Marvin's layered vocals, the way it built and released tension. Radio programmers started noticing something. People weren't calling to complain. They were calling to request. A station in Philadelphia added it to heavy rotation and saw ratings jump. Detroit, Marvin's hometown, played it every hour. College radio stations that didn't answer to corporate advertisers started hammering it, and college students responded overwhelmingly. Frankie Crocker at WBLS was the first major market director to crack. He added Sexual Healing to light rotation on a Thursday afternoon, expecting backlash. Instead, his ratings went up. Within days, Chicago followed, then Los Angeles, then every major market that had initially boycotted the song. By week 6, Sexual Healing was top 10 on both the R&B and pop charts. By week 8, it was number 3 on the Hot 100, held out of the top spot only by Lionel Richie and Hall & Oates. It would spend 10 weeks in the top 10, selling over 2 million copies. In February 1983, 5 months after that conference room meeting, Marvin Gaye attended the Grammy Awards. Sexual Healing was nominated in 4 categories. It won 2, Best Male R&B Vocal Performance and Best R&B Instrumental Performance. When his name was announced for the first award, Marvin walked slowly to the stage. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. He looked different than he had in September, healthier, more present. The Grammy win meant validation, but it also meant vindication. His acceptance speech was brief. "I want to thank everyone who believed in this song even when it wasn't easy to believe in it. especially the people who bought it when radio wouldn't play it. You made this possible. The camera cut to the audience. Several radio programmers were there, clapping politely, probably not realizing that Marvin's words were directed at them. Backstage after the ceremony, Frankie Crocker found Marvin. The two men had barely spoken since that day in New York. Frankie extended his hand. "I owe you an apology," Frankie said. "We were wrong. Not about what would happen, but about what mattered." Marvin shook his hand but didn't smile. "You were doing your job. I understand that." "No," Frankie insisted. "We were scared. We let fear make the decision instead of trusting the music. You didn't." What nobody in that conference room had understood was that for Marvin, sexual healing wasn't a marketing decision. It was survival. After Belgium, after the drowning incidents, after months of wanting to die, he had found a reason to make one more record. And that reason was honest. Uncomfortably honest. The kind of honesty that makes radio programmers nervous and audiences lean in closer. The song's success changed more than Marvin's career. It changed radio's relationship with explicit content. Within a year, Prince would release Darling Nikki, and while it sparked controversy, the door had been open. Artists no longer had to soften their sexuality to get airplay. They just had to be willing to stand behind it. Marvin gave one interview about the radio boycott 6 months after the song's release. The interviewer asked if he had ever doubted his decision to refuse compromise. "Every day," Marvin admitted, "I needed that song to work. I needed the money. I needed to prove I could still do this. But I needed my dignity more. If I'd changed it, even just the title, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what would have happened if I trusted myself." He paused, looking down at his hands. We spend so much time asking permission. Permission to be honest. Permission to feel things. I was tired of asking. The interviewer pressed, "What if radio had never played it? What if it had failed?" Marvin smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then I would have failed telling the truth. That's better than succeeding with a lie." Sexual Healing became Marvin Gaye's biggest commercial hit since I Heard It Through the Grapevine 14 years earlier. It introduced him to a new generation of listeners who had never heard What's Going On or his duets with Tammy Terrell. It won Grammys, sold millions, and became a permanent part of pop culture. But for Marvin, the real victory was smaller and more personal. It was walking out of that conference room and not looking back. It was choosing integrity over fear. It was proving one more time that the suits didn't know everything. In one of his last interviews before his death in 1984, Marvin was asked about his legacy, about what he wanted to be remembered for. He thought for a long moment. "I want people to know I didn't always make the safe choice. Sometimes I made the true one." That conference room meeting in 1982 lasted less than an hour. The men who attended it probably forgot about it within weeks. But Marvin never did, because it was the moment he remembered who he was. Not Motown's Prince of Soul, not Berry Gordy's creation, not the man who sang safe love songs for white audiences. Just Marvin, flawed, frightened, and finally honest. And that honesty, uncomfortable as it made everyone, was what healed.